Location: on the streets of Queens, NYC. Peter Parker was in the cab, en route to school. He had to admit he was barely trying to control his excitement. How could he? The past few weeks had been filled with reoccurring dreams of his experience with Tony Stark and the Avengers. Peter had been invited by Tony Stark to help confront some rogue tensions being created by Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes. Till date, Peter could not believe that he had fought Captain America one-on-one. Truth be told, it had been quite an exciting ride. Peter had several plans upon his return to Queens. There was a lot he knew he could achieve, and he could not wait to demonstrate them. One thing he loved was that in spite of him assisting Tony Stark, his secret identity as Spider-Man was not yet known. Or so he thought. Suddenly, he heard a loud bang as the cab's tires screeched. Peter could feel the vehicle tilt to the side, and suddenly, his spider senses got to work. Realizing that the driver was in mortal danger, Peter immediately took out his web shooters and webbed the driver to his seat, ensuring that the driver would not be severely injured by the time the car hit a solid surface. The car crashed into an alleyway, the force of the crash knocking Peter partially senseless. He struggled to regain his balance when he heard footsteps outside the vehicle. At this point, Peter could tell that the vehicle did not encounter any ordinary accident, and he had to escape. Weakened, he attempted to fight his way out of the car, but a pair of strong arms twisted his arm and smashed his head on the glass window. Peter passed out immediately. His assailants carried his unconscious body away. 4 months later, location: therapy room. May Parker was seated with a bunch of people she did not know, and on a normal day would never associate with. However, grief had its way of dealing with people. They were seated in a circle and they were sharing details of traumatic experiences that broke them. When it got to May's turn, she hesitated. However, after a little nudge from a supportive stranger, she admitted that she was here because her nephew had mysteriously disappeared 4 months ago. Efforts of the law enforcement to find him had proved abortive, and in fact, Tony Stark had taken a keen interest in finding him, but was unsuccessful. Deep down, May felt broken that she would never see Peter again. As soon as she finished speaking, her phone buzzed and she quickly excused herself to go answer the call. When she picked it up, the information she heard forced her to sprint away, throwing her heels to the side. Location: police station. When May arrived at the station, she was half surprised to realize Tony Stark had arrived there too. Stark had been so invested in Peter's disappearance that he ensured every information concerning Peter's whereabouts had gotten back to Jim. Therefore, it was quite possible he got this information first. To their shock, Peter was sitting right in front of them, face towards the flow and silent as ever. Peter had been found. Over time, May and Stark were briefed about Peter. He had wandered to a random police van somewhere across town, and on recognizing him, he was quickly rushed here. However, attempts to get Peter to say anything had proved abortive. As soon as Peter was cleared from the station, he was rushed to the hospital on an all-expense-covered treatment by Stark. The hospital concluded that Peter was suffering from PTSD, and it was best no one probed him to discuss what happened to him during the moments of his disappearance. This way, he was allowed to heal naturally. Aunt May did not mind letting everything else go as long as Peter was by her side now. Stark, on the other hand, believed that something was amiss, but what was it? At the moment, he could not tell. A week later, location: Midtown School of Science and Technology. Ned had been pleasantly surprised to learn that Peter was finally returning to school, although Ned did feel like perhaps it was a tad bit too early for Peter to resume his studies. However, Peter assured everyone that he was more than capable of continuing his academic journey, and nobody needed to be worried about him. From what Ned could witness, Peter did seem quite okay. True, He was more reserved than he usually was, and his voice carried a darker undertone to it now. But Peter was quite the same Peter he knew and loved. In fact, Ned was grateful Peter was taking a shot at embracing normalcy, even after everything he had been through. And Ned was determined to help Peter through his rough time. In the weeks that followed, Ned's perception of Peter began to change slowly. For some reason, Peter was more of a flirtatious person now, and he did not mind expressing interest in quite a number of girls in his class. This was definitely unlike Peter, and it bothered Ned slightly. Perhaps what bothered Ned more was when Peter was more than able to start acting on his crush on Liz Toms, which Ned was certain was something Peter wouldn't do without talking to him first. However, Ned was not the only one who felt like Peter had undergone quite some severe changes during his disappearance. Tony Stark remained vigilant about Peter Parker, and thus he assigned Happy Hogan to keep an eye out for Peter. If Happy noticed anything unconventional, he was meant to report to Tony Stark with immediate effect. On one occasion, Peter abruptly asked Happy Hogan why he was so invested in his life when Happy came over for dinner with Aunt May. Happy had responded by noting he was interested in Peter because he had a thing for Aunt May. Peter had said nothing in response. 2 days later, Happy Hogan had been found severely brutalized in a random alleyway. The attack on Happy Hogan only made Tony Stark and Ned more suspicious of Peter. Location: the Vulture Lair. Adrian Toombs and his henchmen were having quite the day as they went about their illegal activities. Of course, nothing had prepared them for a young boy walking into their lair like he owned the place, his looks set to kill. Thomas and his men attacked the boy immediately, on realizing he meant trouble. However, the boy overpowered all of them quickly. Soon enough, the boy had murdered all of them in the most brutal way possible. The moment he snapped Adrian Toms's neck, Peter Parker smiled and admitted that his plan was working. Location: Midtown School of Science and Technology. Liz Thompson had been heartbroken over her father's death, but she felt worse discovering that her father died a criminal. Of course, as a result of Adrian Toms's death, a lot of people began to silently disregard Liz, treating her like a criminal's daughter. Of course, all these actions took quite a toll on her mental health. However, Peter Parker's treatment of Liz differed from the majority. 601 his classmates. He had become increasingly nice to Liz and even became more supportive, showing her all the affection she could think of. No one had thought it awkward as Peter's crush on Liz was no longer a secret, but Ned felt like something was amiss. He couldn't justify it, but he knew something was wrong. He had to act. Location: Parker residence. That day, Ned arrived at Peter's home and fortunately met Aunt May. At first, he had been worried about the possible outcomes of this meeting with Aunt May, but now he was ready to take whatever risk to find out what was happening to Peter. Aunt May had been reading a book when Ned arrived, and as soon as he told her he needed to talk about Peter, she gave him an audience instantly. Ned admitted that he did not think Peter was in his right senses, and he was worried for Peter. Of course, May attempted to dismiss Ned's concerns as probably nothing, but Ned urged her not to ignore the possible signs that she had seen as well. Ned admitted that something happened to Peter in those 4 months, and whatever it was changed Peter. The sooner they addressed whatever it was, the better for Peter. And with that, Ned took his leave. May spent the first 10 minutes after the conversation lost in thoughts. She was trying very hard not to be bothered by everything Ned said, but deep down she knew that Ned raised quite some solid points. With a sigh, she picked up her phone and rang Tony Stark. She needed to save her nephew. Location: Stark residence. The moment Stark had received a call from May Parker, he knew that he should never have ignored the lead that something was off with Peter. After the Happy Hogan incident, He had decided to give up on the lead, but now that May Parker confirmed his suspicions, Stark was going to do everything possible to find out what happened to Peter. Stark spent the next 72 hours comparing notes and leads, though he met dead ends on every lead. However, he encountered a lead as soon as he analyzed a seemingly corrupted footage of the day of Peter's disappearance. From the footage, nothing had seemed irregular, but now that Stark checked it again, he realized that he had seen the face of a regular woman. Perhaps she was too regular. Running her face against facial recognition, Stark realized this woman was linked to quite some heinous assassination attempts. All these seemed quite similar to one person, Natasha Romanoff. He picked up his phone and with a deep breath, sent a text message to Romanoff. In the next hour, Romanoff had responded to his text, noting that the woman in question was a widow of the Red Room. Apparently, the Red Room was a covert organization that trained ruthless killers, and from the looks of things, the Red Room had abducted and trained Peter. But why did the Red Room feel the need to abduct and train Peter? Suddenly, Stark did a cross-reference and discovered from various reports that the number of missing high school girls had risen over the past month. Peter must have been brainwashed by the Red Room to abduct girls for them. And right now, it seemed Peter had a target. Location: Liz Tom's residence. Liz had been inviting Peter occasionally to her house ever since her father's passing, so she did not feel weird when he had asked to come over. Besides, today was quite the sentimental day for she would be leaving Queens to go start off a new life somewhere new, and she wanted to enjoy this last night with Peter. When Peter arrived, they had a little talk about Liz moving. Liz admitted that she had feelings for Peter and she was going to miss him a lot when she left. And with that, she leaned in for a kiss. Few seconds after the kiss, she fell unconscious. Peter had laced his lips with a sedative. "You're coming with me, Liz," Peter sighed as he picked up Liz, preparing to take her far away from this town into the Red Room's possession. To his surprise, he saw Ned standing outside the door in a menacing position. Ned must have followed him all the way here. Ned admitted that he knew something was off about Peter, and he lunged towards Peter. However, Peter grabbed Ned by the neck and twisted it speedily, breaking the poor boy's neck and ending his life effectively. Satisfied, Peter attempted to continue his mission before he was suddenly blasted unconscious by an energy blast from behind him. Iron Man was outside the residence, having just arrived to stop Peter Parker. Location: the Avengers Tower. Tony Stark and May Parker looked at the containment cell holding Peter. May felt so heartbroken at her nephew's predicament. She had been briefed on everything. Tony, on the other hand, felt disturbed that he did not trust his instincts on time. Had it been he did, Ned would have still been alive. Watching Peter's body, Tony swore that he would not only cure Peter of his brainwashing, but he would find a way to destroy the Red Room for coming for Peter. They would all pay.